Hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation today on deafblindness and assistive technology, where I'm going to give you a mini overview and some samples of current research that are going on.
Okay.
My name is Walter Wittich, and I am an associate professor at the University of Montreal, and I'm also the chair of the Deafblind International Research Network. I'm presenting to you from Montreal today, and therefore I would like to begin by acknowledging that Montreal is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters from which I present today. Tiohtià:ke, commonly known as Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is the home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. I want to express my respect for the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. I'm also going to quickly declare that I have no conflicts of interests in the content of our presentation today, and I'm displaying here the sources of funding that have supported my research in the past 5 years. When we talk about assistive technology in the context of deafblindness rehabilitation, many consider this the holy grail. The question that I'm asking today in the context of the research that I will present to you is that true? When we look at this idea of the holy grail, of course, there are eye care professionals, hearing care professionals, interveners or other professionals that are specialized in focusing on the needs of people with deafblindness. Of course, there are family members, spouses, informal care providers, and then there is a large selection of third parties, whether these are people that provide formal care, produce the devices, pay for health insurance, or make policy. All of these people have great expectations on an assistive device. And of course, the client, the person living with deafblindness themselves, who has expectations themselves as well. You've heard a little bit already probably about our e-book that we're currently developing with Frontiers for the research topic Development, Well-being, and Lifelong Learning in Individuals with Dual Sensory Loss. That was co-edited by Marleen Janssen, Timothy Hartshorn, and myself. And so I'm going to present to you today 3 of the articles that are part of this series that focus on issues that have to do with assistive technology in deafblindness. The first study I would like to speak about is led by Dijzel and comes from the Netherlands, entitled Assistive Technology to Promote Communication and Social Interaction for People with Deafblindness, a Systematic Review. The goal of this study was to synthesize and analyze the research that has been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, and that is focused on the use of assistive technology to improve communication and social interaction for people living with deafblindness. The team decided to conduct a systematic review of this literature for the period of 2005 to 2020. They searched 9 databases and used the mixed methods appraisal tool to assess the quality of the level of evidence that is available. They also included the technological readiness levels in this study, which I want to go into a little bit further because it is a very interesting concept. The technology readiness levels give a scale or a rating on the technical maturity of the development of an assistive technology. Now, what is very interesting about this is that the first 4 levels of this readiness scale actually refer to the development of the technology in a lab environment where it is not yet available to users. However, levels 5 through 9 then progressively increase the inclusion of real environments and people living with a disability. When we look at the studies that were reviewed in this scientific and systematic review, there are a few things I would like to point out. The first one is that there are only 9 studies that were eligible to be included in this review. It's a relatively small number given the vastness of the scientific literature. The second thing that I find interesting, and that is good news, is that there are 3 studies with relatively high levels of technology readiness. This means that there is technology out there that is available to be accessed by users. However, the remainder of these studies were at levels 1 through 4, which means they are still at the lab and development stage. When we look at the quality assessment, only 1 of these 9 studies actually reached high levels of evidence. This means that most of the other studies were limited in their design or in their execution, and many times that has to do with the feasibility of doing certain kinds of research, given the population, problems with funding, and the kind of design that is possible within the deafblind space. You can explore the themes of this study further yourself, given that this is an open access or free article. I have added the link here. You can also find this directly on the web. The second study I want to talk about is led by Atul Jazwa, comes from our lab in Montreal, and it's entitled Barriers and Facilitators that Influence Social Participation in Older Adults with Dual Sensory Impairment. The goal of this study was to explore perceived contextual barriers and facilitators of social participation, specifically among older adults that are living with deafblindness. We decided to conduct semi-structured qualitative interviews that lasted around an hour each. We were able to recruit 16 older adults, 7 men and 9 women, that are living with acquired or age-related deafblindness. They were all over the age of 65, with a mean age of 86. Their visual acuity was worse than 20/70 in the better eye, and their hearing thresholds on the audiogram was worse than 26 decibels, hearing level. However, they all had sufficient residual hearing to communicate verbally. And given that they all had acquired impairments, they were all verbal. The main outcomes in this study were focused on the societal attitudes towards disability as a barrier, the availability of transportation services, and a barrier to social participation. But what we had not anticipated immediately is that one of the themes that emerged was access to technology and assistive aids that were also a barrier to participation. This came out in 2 specific topics. The first one was more related to personal factors, whereby the acceptance of one's disability played an important role in the capacity to manage and overcome the associated problems. This also linked to the acceptance of assistive devices and the use of these devices. The second point where this came up was specifically about products and technology, where we were collecting various statements that reflected the opinion of equipments, products, and technology that were used by our participants, and how some of them facilitated participation and social engagement, whereas others made it more difficult, or whether the access to these technology devices became the actual barrier. You can also explore this article yourself further with the link that I have displayed here. And again, this is an open access and free article. The third study I want to mention is led by Amy Parker, entitled The Use of Wayfinding Apps by Deafblind Travelers in an Urban Environment, with insights from focus groups. The question that the team was asking is, what is the lived experience of adults who are deafblind when using personal mobile phones and wayfinding apps for urban environments? The team decided to conduct a focus group with 9 individuals that are living with deafblindness. However, this population differs very much from the previous study, because here all participants used Tactile American Sign Language or a form of modified visual American Sign Language. What is also very commendable about this study is their overall methodological approach. They're trying to incorporate concepts that are culturally supportive for research practices. They adopted the concept of participatory engagement, meaning you want to have individuals that are living with deafblindness included in all aspects of this study. So for example, in this case, the focus groups were hosted by people who themselves are deafblind. This was done, for example, to avoid traditional power imbalances that may exist between researchers and participants, and that may create a hierarchy that is not facilitating a clear and open exchange of information. I have listed some of the outcomes here, but I very much encourage you to look into the detail yourself. One of the main outcomes was a desire for apps to functionally provide greater access to information. One of the participants stated, "I would like more access for deafblind via Braille related to navigation information." The second theme that emerged was the desire for equity as a unique disability community. One of the participants stated, "I wish there was something called a deafblind guide that would help the app become more easily findable in the App Store." The third theme that emerged was called independence and interdependence, and it also included communication. Here, one of the participants stated, "With my partner, if we're traveling together and using an app that has voice output, so I just turn it up and turn the phone towards her. I'm like, here you go, listen to this. This is the way we're supposed to go." Again, as I said, the details of these studies are all available for your exploration for free online. You can find the link to this specific study right here. These studies give you an idea of some of the possibilities across the spectrum of assistive device research that is possible in deafblindness. Many of the studies that exist out there deal with initial ideas of a device, its development, whether it can eventually be made available, how can people access this device, what is the uptake of this device, are people using it, are there problems with usability, and does it potentially end in device abandonment? And then many times this cycle begins with generating new ideas for new development. We've recently reviewed some of this information about device abandonment in an open access article in collaboration with a team in Sweden. Again, this information is available for you for free in case you would like to pursue this further. And it's very interesting to explore what kind of variables are linked to the person, to the device, to their environment, or also to the kind of services that are available in rehabilitation for deafblindness using assistive devices. I hope this presentation has motivated you to look deeper into this topic and to explore some of the articles that are available online. For today, I will end with a big thank you to all the people that helped me hold together my little universe of research on deafblindness. If you would like to know more about the kind of services and research that we conduct, I encourage you to follow us on Twitter. And if you're interested in some of our work that we're doing on dementia and sensory loss and sensory cognitive aging, you might also find Team 17 of the Canadian Consortium on Neurodegeneration and Aging very interesting. Thank you very much for your attention.
First, I want to start with saying thank you for giving me the opportunity to present on this study we did about similarities and differences in health, social trust, and financial situation in people with Usher syndrome, a biopsychosocial perspective. This study was published in the special issue of Frontiers on Development, Well-being and Lifelong Learning in Individuals with Dual Sensory Loss. My name is Moa Wahlqvist, and I work as a researcher at the Audiological Research Center in Örebro University. I also want to acknowledge my co-authors on this study, Professor Emeritus Claes Möller, PhD Kerstin Möller, and Professor Emeritus Bert Danemark. On this next slide, you see the aim of the study, and this was to describe the similarities and differences among people with Usher syndrome type 1, 2, or 3 with regard to general health, physical health, psychological health, social trust, as well as financial situation. We also wanted to explore whether age, gender, clinical diagnosis, visual field, visual acuity, and degree of hearing loss were associated variable. And this study builds on previous studies that we have done about health and people with Usher syndrome, where we have compared health outcomes with the general population in Sweden, where people with Usher syndrome have revealed a poorer outcome. And on this slide, we can see the participants. It was 162 individuals with Usher syndrome living in Sweden. All 3 types are represented. We also have data concerning vision, hearing, and genetics that comes from the Swedish Usher register. And these participants have answered 2 questionnaires, one generic about health that is called the Health on Equal Terms questionnaire, and one specific for anxiety and depression, the Hospital Anxiety and Depression Scale. So if we look into the results then, and we will start with general health. No significant differences in self-assessed poor health was found for the 3 Usher groups. And there was also no significant differences for the frequency of poor physical or psychological days, or days when the capacity for work and activity of daily living had been lowered. And then we move on to physical health. Here, significant differences were found in 3 of 13 physical outcomes, and these were tinnitus, pain in hand, elbow, and knee, as well as bowel problems. And we did the regression models, and they did not reveal a clear tendency of which variable that contributed to a poor outcome of physical health. For example, Usher category was associated with a higher risk for tinnitus, but to be a woman was associated with having problems with headache or pain in neck and shoulders, and older participants had a higher risk for diabetes. On this slide, we also have psychological health, and here significant difference was found in 2 of the 20 outcomes, and these were fatigue and suicidal thoughts. And the in-group comparison revealed a pattern with increasing problems with fatigue across the Usher groups. And the same pattern was revealed for suicidal thoughts. And it was so that a non-significant pattern was identified in which persons with Usher type 3 reported most problems for 10 of the outcomes, and people with Usher 2 in 5, and persons with Usher type 1 in 4 of the outcomes. And the pattern of the regression model was similar to the one for the physical outcomes, with not only one variable contributing to a poor outcome. For example, age and Usher category had a significant odds ratio with regard to sleeping problems. And the association between visual field and managing problem revealed that those who had a better visual field had a higher risk for a poor outcome. And then if we move on to the next slide and the social trust and financial situation. These are questions relating to if you trust people in general, if you're afraid of going out by yourself, or if you have someone to share innermost feelings and thoughts with. And for financial situation, it's questions about if you've had problems with paying for rent and other expenditures during the last 12 months. And 6 of the 9 outcomes presented with a significant difference. And regardless of significance, persons with Usher type 3 reported more problems, followed by persons with Usher type 1. Persons with Usher type 2 reported fewest problems. The only exception was for financial difficulties, where persons with Usher type 1 reported least problems. And the regression model revealed that it was different variables that contributed to a poor outcome. For example, gender and visual acuity and age and visual acuity negatively predicted general trust and no one to share innermost feelings and confide in. So to sum up a bit, there was no clear tendency of which of the variables that contributed to the poor health, social trust, and financial outcomes that differed. That doesn't mean that they lack importance, rather they indicate the complexity. So we cannot draw the conclusion that people with Usher syndrome automatically have a poor outcome as their vision or hearing deteriorates. No such conclusion can be made. Thus, a biopsychosocial perspective is needed when describing health of people with Usher syndrome. Otherwise, there is a risk of reducing the complexity and the consequences of living with deafblindness. And this is something that needs to be addressed in rehabilitation and healthcare settings when meeting people with Usher syndrome and also with other types of deafblindness. And with that, we have come to my final slide, and I want to thank you for the attention.
Hi, my name is Lisa. My name's Lisa. I'm going to explain something to you about tactile sign language and protactile movements. For protactile, I'm going to use the short for PT. So first I'm going to focus on sign language, or tactile sign language. If a person is born deaf, they mostly grow up using sign language. But when they lose their vision, it's more and more difficult to see the signs. So they start to feel what a person is signing, and then they use tactile sign. But visual sign language, can you translate it for 100% identical to tactile sign? No, that's not possible. Because you would miss the facial expressions. For example, the face, you cannot feel someone's face. So how can you translate the confirming movement, or like yes or no? You can do that on the hand. If a person signs with a very strong facial expression, for example, there were deaf-blind people, and they started to sort of translate it. So communication, tactile sign language is used pretty similar around the world. But in the year 2007 in America, they moved to another path. There were 2 women, deaf-blind, and they had to work together a lot, so they had to communicate a lot, and they used an interpreter all the time. But sometimes the interpreter, they didn't have time, so then they thought, well, leave it and let's see how we can do it together, and they communicated together and sometimes with a third person as well, and actually it went well. So then they started to do workshops to a few deafblind people and other deafblind people, and everybody was quite enthusiastic about PT. They liked it. So then in America, PT started to get used by more and more people. And then researcher Edwards, he started to do research from 2007 on this Protactile sign, and that got so Protactile, when people have barriers in language, for example, sign language or tactile language or the philosophy or an attitude. On Protactile, they were like, okay, we can see and we cannot hear, so the focus is on touch. And that's why it's called Protactile. So pro, like, let's go, use it. And tactile means touch. So it's a way to use the touch more. So sign language is a very visual language. So they started to change some things, reshape, and that's how they realized PT. But what really is the difference? It has a different attitude, a different philosophy. It's really tactile. And the focus is for deaf-blind people to have their own identity, their own autonomy. For example, if a deaf-blind person is together with a guide or an interpreter, this person gives the deaf-blind person visual information. And the person receives the information so they can use it. But it's also that the guide or this person is not in front, but more one-on-one, like co-navigator. The two women who started working on Protactile, they mentioned 7 principles, and the first most important principle is touch. Touch is really important for Protactile. If you take a person's hand or you touch the person by the hand or the arm or the shoulder, it means we're communicating, and if you lose them, if you let go of the hand, then means there's no communication anymore. So the tactile part is very important. It's like strong following the movement and not the visual. The visual part of the signing is taken out. So it's not using the environment, like moving up and left and right. You're not using the environmental space, but you're using the body. So like arms and hands or legs, for example. For example, if you would say, hey, where can I find the toilet or the bathroom? In sign language, you would sign, hey, go straight to the left and then to the right. Tactile sign language, the person just feels the hand, but it's the same. But in Protactile, you ask someone for the hand and then say thank you. Then you say you're standing here and I'm standing over here. Right here you have a light. Then you walk straight. And when you come here, you find a table. When you get to the table, you go to the left until you meet up a wall. You walk besides the wall, and then you find doors. The first, the second, and the third door, that's the bathroom. So that's really strong tactile, really direct explanation. So a deafblind person can give this information to another deafblind person. So that's an. So if you want to know more about the 7 principles from PT, you could read from Granda and Nuccio, the 2 women who wrote the 7 principles. Thank you for your attention. Bye.
So, hello everybody. Here Marleen Janssen from the University of Groningen again. I was the organizer of this short research symposium on the special issue of frontiers in education. And I'm very happy that the researchers are here still alive for you. And I'm very happy that Lisa van der Mark is there too. She did a wonderful job to pre-record her presentation in sign language and with the voice interpretation. So thank you very much, Lisa. And she is also a guest lecturer sometimes at our university. So I'm really proud that you have done this. But for now, we are here for you, for the audience, and I'm not so good in chatting and all that kind of stuff. But if you have live questions for us, we can answer them. And I see in the chat there are compliments for Lisa, but I don't see a question yet. Of course, the presentations of today, Nasreen Olsen told me that she will take effort to provide the presentations, but we will have to see how that works. So, oh yeah, I see one question. Walter, you can help me with in the area of questions and answers. Is there any possibility to re-watch this presentation? Yeah, that is more a technical question, so I cannot answer that. But maybe Nasreen or Walter.
So I see a question from Peter Simcock, who is asking how the Jazwa team recruited their participants. We have a really lucky setup in Montreal that we have an adult day center that is designed to be accessible for older adults with sensory impairment. And this day center receives older adults at around 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and they stay until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And one of their activities during the day is the option to participate in research. And so while some people may choose to listen to the newspaper or engage in some other activity, one of the options is to participate in one of our studies. So these are older adults who were interested in assistive technology and in giving us some data about their experience of living with combined vision and hearing loss. It's a wonderful opportunity, and it's a great partnership with this day center.
Okay, thank you, Walter and Peter. I'm seeing also a question for Lisa, and that question is as follows. Does Protactile work across countries and different cultures? So maybe Lisa, you can answer that question.
Yes, hello. Yes, the sound is on. check.
Yeah.
Yes, about Protactile, that's the name they use in the United States. Tactile, yes, they use it all over the world. But Protactile, more in depth, that's been used in the United States. But it's starting to spread all over the world. And I think that will be very nice.
Yeah, maybe you can, I have a question for you, Lisa. Can you tell maybe a little bit the difference between Protactile and haptics communication? We have Rita and Russ Palmer here too, so that's interesting.
Yes, sure. What my perspective is on the difference between haptic communication is that it uses more of a code and agreements, and what we use for certain words, we use a signal or a sign, a tactile sign. On the other hand, Protactile is more creative, and it very much depends on the situation, which signs you use. And also it's between two deafblind people. It's not a deafblind person and a hearing person, but it's between deafblind people. And I think that makes it not a language system.
Okay, very clear. I see if there are more questions. Walter, can you help me? Because I see a lot.
So we have a question whether Moa could talk more about her work in the Swedish context, and it was a great presentation today.
Oh, so what can we say about that? Well, the work that I do, the research that I do in the Swedish context has been about health and well-being, mainly for adults with Usher syndrome and deafblindness. But we have also been doing research about family life when a parent has deafblindness. And that is very interesting. And one of the articles in the Frontiers issue is about one of those studies about family life. And in that study, we have interviewed all family members in the families, both the parent with deafblindness, the other parent, and the children, about what they think of how it is to be a parent with deafblindness, how it is to be a child in that family, and what kind of support is needed. And what that study is that the family as a system, they talk a lot about the closeness that they share between each other, but they also talk about challenges with communication, challenges to get help when needed, and so on. And the children, they talk about a life being as any other family, nothing special. And yet there are some situations where they need maybe a little bit of support. So that is an interesting project. We also do some research about older adults with dual sensory loss and the need for support and what kind of rehabilitation they have received. Yeah.
Can you tell a bit about that project, Moa?
It's an ongoing PhD project. So the first study was about prevalence, and the second and third, excuse me, studies are about the older adults and their own views on what kind of support they have received and what kind of support they might need. And the third study is more into depth about how the dual sensory loss affects everyday living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
Clear. We have a last question I see for, I think for Lisa. Did you read that, Walter, already? It's a long one.
We are in the middle of preparing further education for sign interpreters that they can improve interpreting for deafblind people in tactile signing. Are you, Lisa, and other people doing the same that we can exchange with them? We're a small team of one deafblind person, one rehab teacher, and one sign interpreter, and then she provides her email address.
We have to see if Lisa can follow.
It's in the chat as well, so Lisa should be able to access it.
Just a moment, please. Just a moment. We go to the question. Okay, I see.
Can you give an answer, Lisa? This lady is in the middle of preparing education for sign interpreters, and
okay,
she's asking, are you doing the same?
And that is a question for me?
Yeah, there's a question for Lisa.
That's not something I'm doing, no.
No.
But it seems really interesting to me, but it's not one of the things I'm doing now. I work with interpreters like I'm doing now, and I exchange tips while we work.
Okay, very clear. And there are more questions coming, but I have to look to the time because Nasrin told me to be strict on that. So, but I want to thank all the presenters of this small research symposium. I hope you enjoyed it. It's just a small selection, and I hope that we see each other in the future again. Also that I like very much that we have learned to know each other now, also the people from SUITCEYES and the related researchers. And so, because what I find important, and Walter is agreeing with me, I think that the three fields are really uniting. And so the people with congenital deafblindness, people with early acquired deafblindness, and also people with age-related deafblindness. So thank you all for your attention, and have a wonderful symposium further. Thank you.
Thank you, Marleen, and thank you, everyone. It was really nice to have all your presentations. We learned a lot. I hope we keep in touch and we follow this nice work in the future. Thank you.
Keep in touch.
Yes.